Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And hi to everyone. My name is Rafiuddin Rohani and with my partner Puan Siti Suhaila binti Samian. Okay, today we are going to present on challenges faced by students with autism spectrum disorders in an inclusive environment lived experiences in Malaysian Polytechnic. All right, I'm going for the further to the next slide. Okay, education for all as an introduction, and it actually we cannot left behind our special education people, including students with disabilities and students with special needs. And as we know, we have 9 types of categories in disabilities, which is like deaf, blind, learning disability, speech disabilities, and others. And we do believe that no one should left behind in this education because the education system must be inclusive, actively seeking out children while enrolled and responding flexibility to the circumstances and also needs for learners. They have their right to get the education, just like typical students are either in special, what we call special and special school, integration classes, or inclusive education in primary school, secondary, or higher a learning institution. As for example, in Polytechnic itself, we have one student from the autism spectrum, from the autism that been accepted in this institution. This is a very good, um, steps for the special needs student in Polytechnic education system. And the inclusivity of these student is actually need to be upheld and the next level because there are so many people, there are so many outside students with the disabilities are need to be concerned and need to be focused rather than this one people or one student. But persons with disabilities have the right to indiscriminate education and equal opportunity to inclusive education at every level of learning and long life planning. This is Law of Malaysia Act 685 under Section 281. All right. We must not have the discrimination regarding education in every level because all this stated in the law of Malaysia, and education must be inclusive. And this is what we call an inclusivity of all Malaysian, which everything, the normal people, the special people, the disabilities people, and all of us need all of one education or education for all is the main purpose. As the background of the study, inclusive education is doubtful due to lack of awareness. When we talk about special education, we are familiar with special school integration or mainstreaming classes compared to inclusive education, which could be provided to special education students. However, this inclusive concept implementation has been implemented many years back to give the opportunity to those who can complete and qualify to be in normal classes. For special schools, it's already um, control the special, which is deaf problem, slow learners, and others. But the inclusivity of them in the primary or the first the normal institution is not being given to them, especially to those who are very good in the education. And the sensitivity of teachers and education administrators is not so good currently, you know, as we have the double standard for them. And the parenting attitudes also didn't give a full support of their special needs children, and their disabilities mean their lack of empowerment to them, and the peer acceptance, especially friends to friends, are not so good despite of their normality and also disability. This given a gap to them. And also for the community itself in Malaysia itself, yes, we do have a very good community, but then the inclusivity of the disabled students and special needs students are not so good or not in the part that we are giving to the normal people. And unluckily, inclusive education is still doubtful due to a lack of awareness, sensitivity of teachers and education, especially as I said before, and this causes educational discrimination to be continued further and further. And this research is actually uh, to tell you guys people that we have polytechnic students that um, include in this problem, which is an autism autism student, but the inclusivity in this institution is very good. So we can take this as an example to all institutions in this Asia, in Malaysia, or in other countries to be include in the institution for the abnormal or special people. Okay. So our objectives are to explore educators' acceptance towards students with disabilities in the classroom. Second one, to identify the challenges faced by the disabled student in inclusive environment during his studies at higher learning institution. To explore students' expectation of the inclusive environment for the disabled. So we have three objectives right here. Inshallah, we are going to see how these objectives are going through along these what we call research and also findings and also meets the expectation of our beliefs. And inshallah, we are going to the next slide, which is the literature review. And inclusive education is recognized as a basic human right and the basis for a fair and equitable society. This is from European Agency for Development in Special Needs Education 2012, followed in 2013, and many barriers to fulfill inclusion, limited access to social networks, social institutions, and participation in education and employment. This is 2010. And also we have implementation of Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action on Special Education in 1994. Others, and United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD, on 8 April 2008, ratification on 19th July 2010, and also People with Disabilities Act 2008. Okay, this is several literature reviews that have been did by them, and also we have from the JPT BHPP 1000-0803, 8 May of 2012. This is from Jabatan Pengajian Tinggi, instructions for the implementation of action plans to improve teaching and learning for students with disabilities in all public universities by Ministry of Higher Education. And Ministry of Higher Education Malaysia actually has launched the Inclusive Policy for the Disabled or IIUM Disability Inclusion Policy in November 2018, and the need for HEIs to provide a conducive learning environment for students with disabilities has been communicated to all HEIs through the mandate of YB Minister of Education on 14 January 2019. This actually have a very impactful outcome from this what we call movement of the Ministry of Education Malaysia, and the inclusivity of the disabled students or special needs students to the institutions of Malaysia is growth very rapidly, and this is very important for the education for all that been presented by me just now. Okay, from the method and qualitative interview session, this one for the method, I will give to my partner Puan Siti Suhaila binti Samian, inshallah. Okay, Puan Siti Suhaila will be going to present, and please welcome Puan Siti Suhaila Samian.
Okay, thank you, Haji Rafiuddin. I will be continuing the session with method. For this study, we choose to use a qualitative approach, which is this interview, due to the limitation of the sample, because we only have one sample for this study, which is autism student in our institution, as mentioned before. Why we chose interview? Because it is more open and it involves samples, views, perception, and experience from his previous and current studies in the institution. Okay, we go to the next slide. Okay, this is our samples, which is Muhammad Amir bin Muhammad Rafiuddin. Before we conduct the interview session, we get the consent from this student to be the sample of the study. Muhammad Amir, born in 1997, he is the eldest from 4 siblings, and he is suffered from health issues at early stage of life, which is he got asthma, fever, and cough. He also diagnosed as learning disabled at age of 10. When his teacher noticed that he has something wrong in his learning in school, so his teacher advised his parents to bring him and refer him to a specialist. And at age of that, he is diagnosed as LD student. But amazingly, he is a graduate of Diploma of Tourism Management at Polytechnic Ibrahim Sultan. And now he is pursuing his studies in Bachelor of Tourism and Hospitality Management at Polytechnic Ibrahim Sultan, Johor in semester 6. Okay, referring to our objectives, these are the findings from the interview conducted. Regarding educated acceptance, at first, the student assumed that the educators were aware of his presence in class. However, not all of them were aware of the student's condition. Although he is accepted in the class, it takes time for the educators to adapt with presence of special needs students in the class. There is one incident when the student being scolded when he cannot answer one of the questions given by the lecturer. It triggered lower self-esteem in him just because he cannot answer that question. At that time also, the lecturer didn't notice his condition. After realizing there is a different type of student in the class, then the educators start to put attention to the students in order to help him to catch up in the teaching and learning session. From his view, female educators aware more compared to male educators regarding his condition as special needs students in the class. Okay, that the answer for our first objective. This one, the findings for our second objective, which is what are the challenges faced by the students. Okay, we stated 5 challenges faced by the student along his process studying in Polytechnic Ibrahim Sultan. First one, he is being bullied by peers. They call him chicken, which is ayam, just because he is allergic of chicken. Sometimes when he bring a bottle of water into the class, the peers will took his water in the class. He assumed this type of action of the peers is also a bully for him. Sometimes he didn't know how to expose his feeling to his peers so that they cannot do anything to him. Second one is communication barriers. He felt scared to communicate with the lecturer, assuming that no one can understand him. Some of his peers avoiding him when they need to do a group task. Sometimes he felt that he is better being alone rather than gather with his peers or people who do not communicate well with him. The third one, challenges, support from peers. Some of the peers did not have any problem to work with him in a group. Only just a few of them felt it is hard to understand his view, his barriers, his condition. So it also quite hard for him to communicate with his peers. And then he also have low self-esteem. He always fell down almost all the time. He himself thinking that he is so slow, he cannot compete with typical peers, he cannot give his best to the peers. And it took time for him to understand something and to respond with his peers, also with the lecturer in the class. And the highest barriers or challenges he faced along his life is family high expectation. He is the eldest in his family. His parents put a high expectation to him to be independent, to be an example for his siblings. He felt that's a burden for him, whether he could take the responsibility or not with his current condition. Okay, and this is to answer our third objective. What are student expectations on inclusive environment in higher education institution? Key aspect of financial support parties to help him along his studies not only depend on financial support by his family. He also need a peer acceptance. He is really hope that his friend could accept him as he is. And that he is the one and only learning disabled student in the institution. So referring to his condition, he is really hope that all lecturers, all administrators can be prepared and aware of special education need presence in the class and the school environment or institution environment. Because of this acceptance of educators, administrators could help this type of student in gain confidence and faith that they could learn like typical students or at least as far as typical students. Okay. Due to our studies, there are some suggestions that we could suggest, which is implementation of policies, culture, and practices that should be integrated into successful inclusive education to provide equal opportunities for the disabled in education. All the barriers need to be mitigated by both physical and perception barriers for accepting students with disabilities in the mainstream or in inclusive environment. This perception of disability creates barriers to inclusive implementation, so it needs to be further strengthened in higher education and training program. Acceptance of individuals with disability and cultural differences need to be included in curriculum development and be more flexible because we are depending on the student's condition. The curriculum could be adjustable because sometimes we cannot follow the normal or typical curriculum for the typical student. So for this disabled student, we need to make an adjustment so that the students can follow the syllabus. Even though we have to bring to give him maybe a bit longer time for him to finish his assignment or so on. But at least at the final of the semester, at the final, at the end of the studies, he could follow all the instruction and all the assessment given by the lecturers. Okay, and also we need to build a partnership between the education world and the community that eventually leads to the involvement of all parties across education. Every party should be involved. It's not only the students. It will include parents. It will include peers. It will include institution. It will include community. So all the parties should gather in giving a support for student with disability to pursue his study to be in inclusive education so that we can come up with education for all, just like mentioned before. Okay, as a conclusion, inclusive will not be success without awareness and understanding of the needs of students with disability. It also requires a level of empathy, especially among the highest administration of higher education institutions, which is responsible for formulating inclusive education development plan. It needs to take into account the solution measures from various barriers, including physical barriers, information, communication, systemic or organizational barriers, and attitude barriers, which are the biggest barriers for students with disability to enjoy inclusive education in a real sense. So, with these simple studies, it could be a step or it could be a reference for the institution to get prepared. This is our first student. Might be we will receive another student in different category. So with cooperation from all the parties, we can receive another student and put it into inclusive environment so that we can implement education for. Okay, that's our presentation for today. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.